Hi everyone, I'm Zach Reinhardt, here to review the new Boris and Merzbow collaborative album, Gensho. Boris is one of the biggest underground Japanese metal acts right now. They get a lot of respect and they deserve it. They've got a very diverse sound. They've done over an hour long drone metal albums and they've done more poppy rock albums. They've got a lot of great, just experimental metal albums and rock albums under their belt. I'd recommend you check out Feedbacker and Pink and Amplifier Worship and the old heavy rocks. There's just so many. I don't know where to start you, but if you don't know Boris, you should. And then we've got Merzbow, or Merzbow, as some people say. I'm not sure which one's correct, but he's a Japanese noise music producer. He creates thick, abrasive, harsh, hellish walls of kind of screeching noise. And for some reason, I like that. Now, I'm not a huge Merzbow fan personally. I just haven't listened to that much of his stuff, is really the only reason. I know he does a lot of collaborative albums with a lot of other very extreme music artists, with other metal bands and other kind of experimental noise and electronic people. Um, and he is continuing the long musical tradition of Japanoise. And while I'm not hugely into Merzbow in particular, I am hugely into Japanoise. The only other Japanese noise band that is kind of equally as big as him, at least on an international level, is probably Melt Banana. I can't really think of any others that have as much like respect outside of Japan, though certainly some should. And these two artists have come together with a collaborative album here called Gensho. The kind of concept here is that they're taking a bunch of older Boris tracks that have already been released over their mini albums, and they're kind of cutting out all the percussion. So it's pretty much just guitars with the occasional vocal part. And then Merzbow is creating original noise pieces uh, to go over top of these like Boris songs, and they're being released as two different discs. Or if you got vinyl, they're different records, and you need like two CD players or two turntables or two computers, or if you got digital, I guess. And you play them at the same time, and you kind of fiddle with the volume and the EQ and bass boost and all that. And it's meant to be kind of an audience participation thing, which is not something most people do. I mean, it has been done before. The Flaming Lips famously did an album that I think was like 5 discs that you had to play all at once. I listened to it in high school in our music class once. It was really cool. But to get into what this album actually sounds like, Boris has selected a lot of their softer works for this album. There's still certainly big, thick walls of guitar and just like metal involved, but a lot of the melodies are kind of sad, but they're not really dark or like overbearing or monstrous like some of their other work is. They chose a lot of kind of softer, more ballady songs with kind of soaring guitar solos that are kind of melancholy. They only, on a few occasions, really turn to more of their darker sound on only a couple spots on the record. Meanwhile, Merzbow is creating these long, like 20-minute noise pieces to go over top of these Boris songs that are loud. They squeal and they're high pitched and they're dense and cluttered and they're just filled with sound. It feels like your like ears are filled to capacity, and like if somebody was to add another noise, you couldn't hear it because there's no more room in your ears. I mean, I know that's not accurate, but that's what it kind of feels like. And I was pleasantly surprised to see how well Merzbow was able to mold his noise to fit what Boris was doing. They really kind of follow each other throughout the album. The only exception to that is Galoka Part 2, where Merzbow seems to just do whatever he feels like. He just kind of makes this freakish, dense, cluttered mess of noise, and it doesn't really seem to interact with the Boris tracks, and it doesn't really seem to add anything. And there are some like volume dips that kind of throw me off and make me like wonder what the hell they were doing, because it doesn't really fit with what Boris was doing. It's the only real disappointment uh, on the album, and it's kind of a big one because it's a quarter of the album. There are only four Merzbow tracks, but it's not horrible, but it doesn't do much for me like the rest of the album does. But I am happy to say the rest of the album is pretty good. I like the track Galoka Part 1, where Merzbow is doing like a really kind of flimsy, weak, high end noise that's really kind of sparse compared to the kind of hellish clutter of some of his other stuff. And Boris is doing equally as little with these kind of echoey percussion hits that build into a very kind of slow, soft, relaxing song that kind of peaks with this guitar solo. And then it builds eventually, and the noise starts getting denser and more intense, and it eventually builds into this big, thick wall of guitar with this dense cacophony of noise over top of it. And it's a very like interesting build that has kind of peaks and troughs, and it's a lot of fun to kind of toy with the volumes on that track because they really kind of fluctuate in a very predictable manner, and you can kind of decide what you want to do ahead of time and then try to like turn this up and turn this down, and it's a lot of fun to toy with. I also really like this moment in Prelude to a Broken Arm, where they start out with the Boris song Akirame Flower, which is kind of a ballad-ish song. It has these very kind of soaring, melancholy guitars and this like kind of slightly harmonized vocals, and it's very slow and kind of dramatic. And the noise here kind of sounds like a mic out in the wind, and then you've like put distortion on it. It's not incredibly thick, but it's just kind of ever present in the background. Then that eventually builds into the Boris song Vomit Self, where you've got a lot darker sound. Everything's more kind of ominous and monstrous, and it has this just thick wall of distorted guitars with like these big metal riffs in it. And the noise, right when that first guitar note from Boris on Vomit Self hits in, is bow. The noise just picks up in intensity immediately. And it's like you flip a switch to go immediately into this dense, cluttered, thick, cacophonous wall of sound that Boris and Merzbow create together. It's really a kind of intense moment on the album. And as intense and just kind of thick and cacophonous this album can be, I also found it to be pretty relaxing at points. There can sometimes be so much going on in the noise that you kind of tune it out just because there's so much, and it kind of overwhelms your senses and becomes actually quite relaxing at points. And especially when you get these slower Boris songs that have kind of more chilled out melodies and aren't quite as heavy and dark. But the album can also be incredibly intense and cacophonous and dense and cluttered. It depends upon like kind of how much effort you put towards listening to it in a certain way, and that's really kind of what the whole album is about. The whole point of this album is to kind of remind you of your agency as a music listener, which is something we don't think about very often. But the way you listen to music, and especially now that we have like equalizer settings built into all of our music devices and in our phone, and you can change the how bassy it is or how treble it is, and even just fiddling with the volume or listening to it in one ear, these can be meaningful decisions that affect how you listen to this music. And you can listen to the same piece of music in kind of different ways, and that's something we don't really think about very much as music fans. But albums like this come along every once in a while and kind of try to point that out to us, which I think is a good thing. Overall, I like this album. I like a lot of the musical aspects on this album. I think the songs all sound pretty good. And even like aside from the musicality of it, I like what it makes me think about. It makes me like I find myself listening to a track from this album, and then thinking about after I'm done with it, like new ways to listen to it. Like, oh, what if I turned up Merzbow at this part, or what if I really turned down everything and made it really kind of quiet and soft, or what if I turned up Boris at this part? It adds a little bit of fun interactivity to it. I don't know how much I'll be returning to it, but I had a lot of fun with it over the several listens I've given it since it came out, and I'm feeling a 7 out of 10. So, yeah, that's me, Boris, Merzbow, Gensho. New collaborative work. It's pretty good. I like it. Oh, also, there's going to be several reviews coming out over the next few weeks. I know I usually do every other Sunday with a review, but there's just a lot of stuff coming out that I want to cover, and I think has piqued my interest, and I want to at least talk about. So I'm thinking maybe the next 4 weeks might be a review every Sunday. We'll see if I don't get burnt out on it, but there's a lot of music coming out, like there always fucking is. But there's a lot of potentially interesting music coming out like over this next month. So I'll be seeing you guys. Peace.